Hi, everyone. I'm KSN Storm Track 3 Chief Meteorologist Lisa Teachman, based out of Wichita. I am joined by Matt Miller, KSNT's chief. This is one podcast, but two chiefs keeping you covered across Kansas. Hi, Matt. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Lisa. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. It is a pleasure for you to join both of our next star stations covering Kansas here, talking about where things have been with the weather and where things are expected to go, because it is going to turn out to be a pretty busy week for us.
Yeah, and really the next couple of weeks are looking rather interesting. Ups and downs, a few severe weather setup potentials, and obviously a big change from what we had a couple weeks back when it was just high and dry and lots of warm temperatures. We've kind of settled back into maybe a little bit more typical early spring kind of weather.
And it feels more like wintertime today. We've been battling some of the fog here this Tuesday afternoon from this morning through late last night. We've had periods of drizzle, but there's a warm front that's hanging out to the south of us, and this is going to play into our weather later tonight, at least in this part of the state. But for you guys, it's going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, I think we're still in the drizzle. It hasn't really let up too much yet in the northeastern part of the state. But as far as temperatures are concerned, with that front lifting northward, I don't think it's making it to here. So we're going to stay on the cool side at least for another day or so.
A couple of days when we were looking through all the model guidance, we were thinking, okay, Wichita's going to be on the line. Maybe we could get into the 60s. Maybe we could get into the 70s. But when we were looking at data yesterday, we're like, no, that's not going to happen. We're probably going to top out in the 50s. We made it into the lower 50s. Now we have dropped into the 40s, and I think we're still going to lose a few more degrees before our temperatures warm up later this week.
Yeah, the good news is it does warm up, and that's going to be a nice change. It's good and bad news. I guess it really depends on what kind of weather you're wanting, because it is going to set the stage for what's looking like maybe our first decent spring type of a setup for severe weather toward the weekend as well.
One of the things that we've been dealing with in this part of the state, wildfires. I mean, it is so dry. Northwest Kansas, the southern parts of the state. I go back to February 17th, and it was a Tuesday. We started off with a few fires, one in Beaver County, Oklahoma, that tracked to the north. It was only going about 3 to 5 miles per hour. Doesn't sound like it's that fast, but aided by winds of 60, 70 mile per hour gusts, it continued to grow over multiple counties in southwest Kansas. And they have the fire under control. It's been contained, but it burned 283,000 acres.
Yeah, it's interesting. We got a lot of the smoke coming up this way. We didn't get really a lot of the fires, but a lot of the smoke plumes started to kind of drift up into our part of the state as well. We're kind of in a different situation here. We're not as dry, and so we're likely not going to have the same type of fire season. Statewide, it's going to be very different in different parts of the state. The northeastern areas, northern end of the Flint Hills, there's still a lot of overgrowth from last year. We had a lot of vegetation growth last year, and it didn't all get burned, settled down yet. And so there's going to be a lot of prescribed burning going on, and I think that's going to come into play over the next couple of weeks, because we've seen a couple of those burns so far, but not many. And we're already into early March. This is typically when things start getting underway, but we're going into at least a week, maybe longer than a week's pattern of really unfavorable burning conditions because of the wet conditions. And so now we may end up with a compressed down season over the eastern portion of the state as far as what we're getting as far as the time period in which we can burn, which is so different than what you were describing out west.
Mm-hmm. Northwest Kansas, of course, we have abnormally dry to basically moderate drought. Southern Kansas to the southwest, where we had those fires, the drought has continued to deepen, and also southeastern Kansas. But there's a good chunk of the area where we have virtually no drought. And when we look at the stormier pattern that we're going to have for the rest of this week and into next week, I think we're going to be able to remove some of this drought, at least through the southeastern parts of the state. But southwest and to the northwest, I don't think we're going to be able to do that just yet.
Yeah, probably not yet, but there are some indications that the following week gets wetter for them. So we'll see if that plays out as well. But either way, I think you're right. The southeastern counties of the state that have been a little bit more drought stricken, and not terrible drought, but drier, and into that moderate drought stage, I think they have a good chance of getting some really wet conditions over the next few days.
And I have to say, in your part of the state, up in Topeka, when you go back toward Manhattan, Manhattan is probably one of my favorite places, because as you're going through the Flint Hills, you drive up Highway 77 to get up to I-70, and then you cruise over toward Manhattan. When we start to do the burning of the Flint Hills, and you talk about how you have respiratory issues where you get a lot of the smoke in that area, I have to go back a few years ago to Kansas City, and it was a morning where they had a lot of burning, and it was one of those times where you had just the right southwesterly wind that pushed us into an ozone alert day, and I think some fines were handed out because of that. When do you typically see in your area that this starts to pick up? Is it more April 1st? Is it mid, late March?
Yeah, it's mid to late March typically. It gets a little bit worse in the early part of April typically, but then once we get that green up, it really obviously starts to taper off substantially once we get into that wetter, greener kind of stage, just because it's less effective, obviously, with the burning. But yeah, we have that period of time really from spring break all the way toward the end of the month, and then maybe the first couple weeks of April on the days when the wind is lighter. It can be sometimes a level of asphyxiation. It seems like if you get too close, it can get pretty thick. I know that the other issue you mentioned, that Kansas City gets into those ozone alert days, so do areas like Omaha and Lincoln. As the southerly wind tends to bring our smoke northward into there, and they're not real fond of our burning season. We know the necessity of it as part of our vegetative cycle, but I think some of the surrounding states don't really love the method in which we have to keep our plants healthy.
But of course, it's all about a process, and we have to do that kind of a thing. And hey, you know what? We can always say with Nebraska, sometimes when we get that northwesterly winds, we get the feedlot smell this way.
Yes. We had a little bit of that here yesterday from them, and so they send us something every now and then that they can keep that smell up that way.
I'll never forget several years ago in Kansas City when we had that happen, and Joe Loria, who is at our sister station WDAF in KC, we started doing some investigating, and we're like, what is this smell? Where is this coming from? Because so many people were complaining. They said, is there a problem with the sewer system? What's going on? And you were able to chase it to the feedlots.
Yeah, and most likely what happens is that early one in the fall, that first cold front that comes in before the feedlots have kind of frozen over and everything has kind of frozen the smell down too, that first really intense cold front, the heavy cold air stays low to the ground, it can come in like you are standing right in the feedlot. It can be that strong of a smell. So again, we give them smoke, they give us methane.
They give us a little something else, a little bit extra, right?
Yeah.
Who would have thought that our first podcast together that we would be going in that direction? But
exactly, the unplanned conversations, that's how they work.
That's how it is. The first week of March is always a special week in Kansas. It is known as Severe Weather Preparedness Week. This is a time when you need to start making your action plan with your family if you have not done so already, and also make sure that you practice that plan and do it frequently. To every single day this week, Matt, we have something that's a little bit different, something that's lined up. Yesterday, Monday, it was all about preparedness. Today, it's about flood safety. And tomorrow, it is the big tornado drill day.
Yeah, and I know there's been some concern. There was a concern or two expressed by some of the emergency managers in our areas. We're still expecting it to be cloudy. Is it still going to happen? Will we do the statewide tornado drill, and at least this part of the state, it is still on. So at 10 a.m. tomorrow, when the statewide drill goes on, that's a perfect time to practice your plan, or at least develop your plan if you don't have it yet. I think that's so critical. I think there's a lot of times that we don't give the attention to having that plan in place. You can make so much calmer, level-headed decisions when you know what you're going to do, not when you're trying to figure it out and you get frazzled. That's just not the time to be doing that. Obviously, if you can do that in advance, using this 10 a.m. time tomorrow as kind of the time period to make sure you have everything you need to know and readied for tornado season, that's a great thing.
And you visit a lot of schools in your viewing area, as do I. And I had one earlier this afternoon. And one of the things that I always tell kids is make sure that if you have seconds to get to your tornado safe place, grab 3 things. Grab a pillow for your head, a blanket for your body, and your shoes. So many people from the Greensburg tornado of 2007, if they were in their basement, that's what they were looking for. What do you tell students when you go out and visit them? What really sticks out in your mind that you make sure that no matter the age, this is what they do?
Well, one of the things I'm trying to make sure they understand is that there are certain times when they have plenty of notice, and some we have 15 to 20-minute lead time on a lot of larger tornadoes. And the unfortunate part is that not every tornado is honestly survivable above ground. Wish it wasn't that way, but it's just the fact of it that sometimes you need to find a better shelter, whether it's a complete safe room or an underground shelter. Obviously, that's good because tornadoes are happening above the ground, so you get underground and you're in pretty good shape. So what I do is I have the kids raise their hands if they do have a basement. And I said, it's not a problem if you don't have a hand up, but look around at all your friends that do and find one and make a plan with your family of which one you're going to get to. And that way they already know if they get 15, 20 minutes, because usually you're talking a smaller town, you can get anywhere in 5 minutes. And so if they have a 15-minute time, they could get over to a neighbor's house, a couple houses down the street, and get in there. I reminded when I was living in Oklahoma City back in 1999 during that big May 3rd tornado outbreak. There was a guy in that one of those neighborhoods, I don't know the exact number, probably about 40, 50, maybe even 60 people in his neighborhood. He rounded up. He had the only basement on his street and a couple blocks away. And so he went around and just told everyone, come get in my basement, come get in my basement. And when we had our helicopter up and it flew over the community afterward and nothing was moving. We thought, first thought was it killed them all. It was just such bad damage. Yeah. But instead, when they started moving some of the debris away, 60 or so people came up out of one guy's basement, all fine.
Wow. May 3rd, 1999, I remember that day because I'm from Hayesville, Kansas. And you in Oklahoma City got the F5, we got the F4. Right. And that tornado in Moore being so powerful, it sucked up pavement with winds in excess of 300 miles per hour. And the house that I grew up in, we didn't have a basement. And so we always had to go into the bathroom. And I always make sure that I tell them, try to give yourself as much time as possible. Make sure that you are being weather aware. I think back to the April 29th, 2022 tornado. We knew 4 days before that tornado hit southeast Wichita over toward Andover that it was going to be a day. And all it takes is one. All it takes is one tornado. Right. And a lot of people thought, and then this is a common thing, it's complacency. They think that it's not going to impact them, but it certainly does. And it certainly can.
And I think the one thing I've always appreciated about people in Kansas, I think that the majority of people look at it when a tornado hits, they look at it and think, what would have happened had it been 1 mile away or 2 miles, north or south of where it was. And you think about that what if a lot. And I think it's a really good mindset to be in because it helps you remember that the potential is still there. It may have missed you this time, but that doesn't mean it's going to always miss you and just always have that plan in place. Living for a while, I worked in Tennessee, and it was really hard to get that mentality in place over there because so many people would look at it and every time they would get missed, it would reinforce in their mind, see, it always misses me. And that's kind of the wrong way of looking at it because, most of the time it will miss you. And that's great that it doesn't hit you every time, but you've got to be ready for that one.
And that day of May 3rd, 1999, I was a freshman in college. I was supposed to intern here at KSN that day. And for whatever reason, my car broke down. And I was blocking everybody else's car in. I think it was the universe saying you need to stay close to home. And when my dad put the new alternator in or whatever he did after he fixed some citation somewhere, he said, drive out to the southwest, get it warmed up for about 20, 30 minutes. And I saw that thunderstorm and I thought, this is the most beautiful thing that you could imagine. But then about an hour and a half later, it's what produced the tornado that came right through Hayesville. And where our house was at off of Hungerford, it was literally about a half of a mile to the east of us. So had that tornado been a little bit closer, then our house could have been hit in that. And it was a close call. And we had a dog, and I'll never forget the dog, Bobby. She was probably the smartest one in the whole family because she was already in the bathroom. My dad was running a weather net for his spotter group, Racy's here in Sedgwick County. He works with emergency management. And so he was doing his thing. I don't know where my mom was, but I could only imagine what the dog was hearing. And here I am trying to peek out the door, trying to look at this tornado and seeing the southern sky, just this incredible shade of sea green. And that's telling me at that time, you've got some hail in this storm, but there was no way that I could see the tornado. And I was listening to Dave Freeman, who was the former chief here, do his coverage. And then I listened to it on radio as it continued. And of course, once the power went out, I ran like mad to get into the bathroom. So it was me huddled there with the dog that day, but I'll never forget that. And then we didn't know that Oklahoma City, that the Moore tornado had happened until days later because we were literally shut off from communication.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was even down there. There was a lot of shut off of communication on that big one. It's interesting. You said you were interning or so during that time. I was interning down at KWTV in Oklahoma City,
and Gary England.
Yeah, I was working right next to Gary England at the time, and I was working there, and he was running the radar, and I remember, it was my second wedding anniversary too, so we didn't get to go out and celebrate for our anniversary. My wife was in a hospital basement taking shelter, and I was at the station. I remember him looking over at the monitor, and he couldn't talk to me because he had his mic on, he was talking on air. But he just kept like feverishly pointing at the radar couplet that was indicating the circulation, is looking at me with a look in his eyes that basically said, "Look at this storm. You'll never see one like this again in your life. This is unbelievable." So I learned a lot that evening, that's for sure.
And what an honor to be able to work with the Gary England.
Yeah. He was a fantastic what he did, and a pioneer in the business. Down to the little. I didn't know that the way that map that we're so used to seeing the corner of the screen, that was developed at a TV station there in Oklahoma City, where they put a studio camera up next to a wall that had all of the counties there that were backlit. And when a tornado warning would be issued, you'd see a hand go across there, and they'd pull off the county's cover, and it would light it up red from behind. So kind of an interesting throwback to how technology changed in the last few decades.
Mm-hmm. We've seen a lot of technological advances even since the Moore tornado in 1999. You have crews that are now flying drones into tornadoes, and we can see what it looks like in tornadoes, whereas before you had the pods, and you just hoped and prayed that the tornado would go over those pods.
Yeah. So definitely some changes. Now we do have that chance for some storms later this week, and I don't know that it's necessarily. You and I probably haven't really discussed yet our thoughts on the setup for this week. I don't know if we want to start with kind of the look of tonight.
Yeah, let's start with
our
tonight.
Area up here in the northeastern part of the state. I just don't think we're going to end up getting as many storms. We're just a little bit too cool, too cloudy, and I think the pattern for us keeps favoring it farther and farther south. For the people in the Topeka viewing area, it's looking like we'll get some drizzle and showers, but most of the storms may be a little bit farther down toward the Pittsburgh and maybe Joplin areas.
That's going to be more towards tomorrow morning in the far southeast part of Kansas, but where does it start first? It's actually going to start in my territory. I'm thinking just to the southwest of Medicine Lodge. We're going to be playing that warm front pretty closely, and the slightest position to the north or to the south. I've seen a lot of the models trying to take it a little bit farther to the south, but I still pinpoint after midnight to the southwest of Medicine Lodge. You see some of this development, Harper County, Oklahoma, which is also my viewing area, and then you're going to see more of these thunderstorms develop along the Kansas-Oklahoma state line, and then they're going to be tracking to the northeast, evolving into a complex. Heavy rain. There's also going to be lightning, there's going to be thunder, but there's probably also going to be some hailstones within some of these thunderstorms. And the reason that we have the marginal risk anywhere from a line from Hutchinson over toward Pratt and to the southeast of Topeka, any place is fair game that you may be able to get some hailstones that could get quarter size or maybe up to ping pong ball size hail. You look back to what we had on Sunday, we did have some ping pong ball size hail reported in Marion County. We also had some quarters. So I think it is possible, given the colder temperatures that we have aloft with that warm frontal position, storms are going to initiate later tonight. And then tomorrow, it looks like most of this pushes off to the east in the morning. Then we get a break. We may see some clearing in western Kansas. It may get a little bit closer to the central parts of the state. But I think most of central and eastern Kansas is going to stay locked in with the clouds. It'll impact our temperatures. It's going to be colder under the clouds, warmer in the sunshine, a difference from the 50s into the 60s.
Yeah, and then we get into Thursday, and we all start really clearing out and warming up, and we get finally into southerly flow over a larger part of the state. That's where you see the outlook then kind of enhancing. And I apologize, I sent you that graphic and not zoomed out enough.
It's fine.
Should have.
It is completely fine, because what happened today is that the Storm Prediction Center has changed how they're doing some of the outlooks, and honestly, some of the computer systems are having a little bit of a stroke right now, and we're having to work through some of the technical difficulties. We may have to draw these ourselves in order to get them to come through A-OK, but it is something that we are working on with our weather vendor right now. But one of the things that I'm really glad that the Storm Prediction Center did with the update this morning, because I talked about it on air yesterday, and I was really surprised that even yesterday they didn't put Southwest Kansas into the risk. Yes, I agree with Oklahoma down toward Texas, but I really do think that they missed a sliver of Southwest Kansas, which they have now added into this outlook for Thursday, because that's where the thunderstorms are going to start. We're going to be struggling a little bit with the moisture return. You're going to have lower 50s, maybe mid 50s when it comes to the dew points. You're not going to get into more of that deeper, richer moisture air until we get to Friday.
Right. And then the issue with Friday is actually what you're seeing here on Thursday, I think, because what we end up with is that threat area then slides to the east. The question about this one to me, and I see this is so often on these multi-day events, is how much residual cloud cover and lingering showers. I honestly, I could see this going either way. I could see us clearing out and us seeing all these thunderstorms rapidly develop during the late afternoon, early evening, and getting quite robust. And just as easily, I could see this ended up cloudy and a little bit cooler than anticipated, and the cap holds, and we don't get any thunderstorms of significance in the area. And I think it's a real conditional setup for Friday. The thing is, though, if it were to break through and form, then there is a lot of upper level support to these. So it's kind of one of those conditional setups that have to be watched a little bit more closely as we get closer to it. You're
going to have the instability, you're going to have the shear, you're also going to have a little bit more time for the atmosphere to brew when it comes to the moisture, because like I said, on Thursday, you're going to be struggling with some of those dew points, lower mid 50s, but then you start to see some 60s. And if you can get that to also play into it with the clearing, the instability, then you're going to have a pretty good setup for severe weather this far to the north. And I know our chase teams are already looking at that. We have one of our storm trackers, Jacob Honeycutt, who is going to be out, and he's in Kansas City, and I know he's going to be coming back this way, and he's going to be favoring central and eastern Kansas, just depending on how things are going to shake out. Because I definitely see the storms to the southwest developing and then becoming more numerous through central Kansas while we're sleeping Thursday night. But do you get that clearing? And that's going to be something that I think we're going to have to wait until we get to Friday morning for us to see. And this is pretty much the setup when you have that low pressure system that comes in, the dry line. You know, where is that dry line going to be? Is it going to be, more central Kansas? Is it going to be a little bit farther to the east? What that dry line is, and it tells us, is it's the separation from more moisture to the east and the drier air to the west. And this is pretty much a perfect setup, but it's like, can we get that sunshine? Can we get that recovery?
Right, and this is just a generic setup, but it happens to be pretty much exactly with what we're looking at for Friday, with the exception of, I think on Friday the dry line will be a little farther east than it's indicated on this just kind of textbook kind of an example here. But other than that, you get the low to the north in Nebraska, you get the trailing dry line through central or east central Kansas. That is a typical setup for us for severe weather, obviously across the eastern half of the state. The question, though, as Lisa was mentioning, is will we clear out from overnight thunderstorms Thursday night in time to be able to maximize that heating and actually see it come to fruition? And I think you're right. I don't think this is going to be a question that we get answered until Friday morning.
Now I have to ask you, Matt, and all the different severe setups that you have worked over the history of your career, what are some of the ones that really stick out in your mind that you've covered?
I think for me, probably the Manhattan EF4 tornado back in 2008 is one of the most, maybe the most prolific ones as far as knowing, and that first time it was on my shoulders, kind of in being in that chief position, to have to warn a community of that size that there was a for sure tornado on the ground. And had it not lifted on the west side of town, I mean, it did hit the kind of through almost central portions, but it was weakening as that finally hit the eastern side of town and it lifted. You knew if people weren't getting the word, and if people weren't taking the right actions, they were going to get hurt. That, though, ended very well. We didn't even have a single injury on that particular portion of the storm. So that one sticks out probably more than any. As far as more recently, the Lawrence tornado was huge. And so that one had started in Osage County and moved up. And then the other one would be the day before the Joplin tornado. We had the Redding tornado around here, and that's another big one. I had just spoken at the school about a week or two before that, and so can still see the kids' faces in my in my mind, and I'm thinking they're all in the path of this thing, and so that was another tough one.
From working in Kansas City, I can just check off the boxes because I remember covering a lot of those tornadoes as well. And when I did a lot of chasing back this direction, I remember within your viewing area, I almost got shot after the Harveyville tornado. We got the tour through town at about 12:30, something like that in the morning. And that tornado taught me that you need to make sure that you have your head on a swivel and that you're looking at everything around you. Because if your house has been hit by a tornado, and that was an EF3 tornado, there was one person that died. What goes through your mind if you see a whole bunch of people that are carrying stuff and they have flashlights at 12:30 in the morning? There's no electricity in this town. And this gentleman came out of his house and he was walking he was pretty fierce coming in our direction. And I'm glad we had the sheriff's deputy with us because the sheriff's deputy stopped, turned around and said, I don't want you guys to say anything. I don't want you to do anything because I need to go talk to this guy. And so the sheriff's deputy goes up, talks to him. They exchange a few words. And my photojournalist from KMBC was smart. He was rolling on this. And afterwards, we went frame by frame by frame to confirm that guy had a revolver and he was prepared to shoot.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was definitely a life lesson for me at that time. But stepping into the chief role, I would definitely have to say the April 29th, 2022 tornado, Southeast Wichita, Hayesville, having grown up around here and remembering April 26, 1991, when Hayesville, Southeast Wichita, McConnell Air Force Base, and Andover were all hit, it just reminded me of that day. And I'm like, this is happening again. And then last year, May 18th, when we had a wedge tornado that went into Grinnell, and then we had a tornado emergency issued for Greensburg. And I remember hearing my mentor's words like echoing through my head. And he and I had a conversation about it this past weekend. And he says, yeah, that's pretty eerie, the fact that you were having to relive something like that again. And by the grace of God, that tornado shifted southeast at the last second. It did do some damage on the southeast side, but Greensburg didn't take a direct hit. And then we had another tornado emergency that was issued for the Plevna area. So I think those are definitely ones that stick out in my mind since being in this chief role. And I have to tell you this, Matt, I was at an event a few months back. It was honoring our 911 dispatchers. And there was a gentleman who sat across from me at the table, and I guess he knows your parents.
Okay, well.
I'll have to send you the picture.
Yeah, I'll have to see who that would be.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it has been great joining forces with you on this Under the Radar podcast, and I'm looking forward to so much more that we can discuss from our viewing area here in Wichita that covers 77 counties among 3 states and 2 time zones, and also what you guys do up in Topeka, because we have a lot of people that have students that go to KU, that go to Manhattan, that is in your viewing area.
Right. And of course, you guys taking up a big chunk of the state that all your weather's coming our way. So having that kind of balanced outlook of the whole state should be a good thing. All
right. Well, we're looking forward to this Under the Radar podcast with Chief Meteorologist Matt Miller in Topeka. And I'm Chief Meteorologist Lisa Teachman here in Wichita. Everybody, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See ya.